In 1956, a 12-year-old German boy went on a ski vacation in Switzerland. He spent 2 weeks with a quiet, distant stranger his family introduced as Uncle Fritz. The man was cold, formal, and seemed uncomfortable around children. The boy would not learn for another 4 years that this stranger was his father, Josef Mengele, the angel of death, the most wanted Nazi alive. But here is what no one talks about. This meeting was not a desperate reunion arranged in secret. It was carefully orchestrated by a wealthy family that knew exactly where Mengele was hiding and would protect him for the next 3 decades. Not out of love necessarily, out of something more complicated, something that reveals how deep family loyalty can run, even when the person you are protecting has become a monster. The stranger on the slopes. The boy's name was Rolf. He was just old enough to remember the trip clearly, but too young to understand what was happening. His mother had told him they were visiting a family friend, Uncle Fritz, a businessman living abroad, the kind of vague explanation adults give children when the truth is too heavy. For 2 weeks, Rolf skied with this stranger. They shared meals, they walked through the Swiss snow together, but something felt wrong. Uncle Fritz kept his distance emotionally, even when they were side by side. He asked questions about Rolf's life in Germany, his school, his friends, his interests, but offered almost nothing about himself. The warmth a child expects from family simply was not there. Rolf returned home with a strange feeling he could not name. 4 years later, at 16, he would finally understand why. His mother sat him down and told him the truth. Uncle Fritz was Josef Mengele, his father, the man who had conducted experiments on prisoners at Auschwitz, the man every Allied intelligence agency was hunting, the man whose name had become synonymous with the worst crimes of the Nazi regime. And his family had known where he was the entire time. If you want to see how other Nazi families handled their legacies, subscribe and stick around. The name on every farm. To understand how the Mengele family protected Josef for so long, you first have to understand who they were. They weren't minor functionaries or forgotten collaborators. They were one of the most successful industrial families in Bavaria. Mengele Agrartechnik manufactured farm machinery, threshers, balers, and combines. If you were a German farmer in the 1950s or 1960s, there is a good chance you owned equipment with the name Mengele stamped on it. The company was a market leader, employing hundreds of workers in the town of Günzburg. The Mengele name wasn't whispered in shame there, it was printed on paychecks. This created a bizarre split reality. To the outside world, the name Mengele meant horror. Survivors of Auschwitz testified about the doctor who stood on the platform selecting who would live and who would die, who experimented on twins, who injected dye into children's eyes to see if he could change their colour. But in Günzburg, the Mengeles were respected business people, employers, pillars of the community. And they had resources, money, connections, loyalty from employees who owed their livelihoods to the family. When Josef fled Germany in 1949, he did not disappear into a void. He disappeared into a support network his family built and maintained for decades. They had both the means and the motivation to keep their fugitive brother hidden. And that is exactly what they did. The courier and the cash. The family's protection wasn't passive. They didn't simply hope Josef would survive on his own in South America. They funded his entire fugitive existence with meticulous care. Every month, a stipend of $100 to $175 made its way from Germany to wherever Josef was hiding. The amounts sound modest today, but in Argentina, Paraguay, and later Brazil, this was enough to live comfortably. Not lavishly, Josef complained about money constantly, but safely. The payments kept coming for over 30 years. The man who made it all work was Hans Sedlmayr. He was a loyal employee of Mengele Agrartechnik, trusted by the family for decades. Sedlmayr served as the single thread connecting Josef to his relatives' wealth. He handled the transfers. He carried letters back and forth. He was the courier who ensured the world's most wanted Nazi doctor never ran out of money or lost contact with home. Every transaction was carefully managed to avoid detection. There were no direct wire transfers from Germany to Josef. There was no paper trail that investigators could follow. The family understood they were committing crimes by aiding a fugitive, but they also understood that getting caught required making mistakes, so they did not make any. But money alone was not enough. The family needed the world to stop looking for Josef entirely. And for that, they created something more elaborate, a fiction designed to make him disappear completely. The widow's strategy. In 1954, Josef's wife Irene divorced him. On paper, this looked like rejection, a woman severing ties with a monster she could no longer stand beside. But the reality was more calculated. Irene's divorce was not about abandoning Josef. It was about protecting the family's cover story. With the divorce finalized, Irene could remarry without raising questions. She could move on publicly, present herself as a woman who had put her past behind her. Meanwhile, Josef remained very much in contact with the family through Sedlmayr's courier network. The divorce was theatre, a way to make his trail go cold. But the story takes a stranger turn. Josef's brother Carl Jr. died young, leaving behind a widow named Martha. She was family by marriage, connected to the Mengeles through tragedy. In 1958, Martha travelled to South America to marry Josef. Think about that for a moment. A woman married into the Mengele family, lost her husband, and then travelled across the ocean to marry her dead husband's brother, a wanted war criminal living under a false name. The arrangement sounds almost medieval, like something from a dynastic alliance rather than a 20th century family. But it served a purpose. It gave Josef a companion, someone to share his isolation, someone bound to him by family ties that predated his crimes. Martha and Josef lived together in Argentina for years, a grotesque parody of domestic normalcy. She eventually returned to Europe, settling in Italy until her death. Her motivations remain unclear. Was it love, duty, some twisted sense of family obligation? Whatever drove her, Martha's presence in South America represented just how far the Mengeles would go to support their fugitive. The weight of blood. Back in Germany, Rolf Mengele was growing up with a secret that no child should carry. At 16, he learned the truth about Uncle Fritz. His father was alive. His father was the angel of death, and his entire family had been lying to protect him. Rolf's response was to distance himself as completely as possible. He studied law, perhaps searching for some framework to understand justice that had been denied to so many. He eventually changed his surname, taking his wife's name to shield his own children from the weight of blood. He built a life that looked nothing like the one his father had lived. But the question burned inside him for years. Who was his father, really? Not the monster described in testimonies and trial records. Rolf had read all of that, but the man himself, the human being who had somehow committed those acts and then fled to live out his years in hiding. What did he think about what he had done? Did he feel anything at all? In 1977, Rolf made a decision. He would go to Brazil and confront his father face to face. He would ask the questions that had haunted him since he was 16. He would look into the eyes of Josef Mengele and try to understand. What he found would stay with him for the rest of his life. The man who felt nothing. Rolf arrived in Brazil to find a 67-year-old man living under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. The alias belonged to an Austrian Nazi sympathizer who had befriended Josef years earlier, a man who eventually died and left Mengele his identity to use. Josef was bitter by then, isolated. He complained constantly about money, about his health, about the restrictions of his hidden life. He had aged poorly, his face weathered by decades of paranoia and tropical heat. But what struck Rolf most was not his father's physical deterioration. It was his complete lack of remorse. Josef Mengele claimed he had never personally harmed anyone. He insisted he was just doing his duty. He expressed no guilt for the experiments, the selections, the children who died under his watch. In his own mind, he was a scientist who had been given an opportunity and taken it. The moral dimension simply did not register. Rolf pushed back. He challenged his father's rationalizations. He demanded some acknowledgement of the horror, but Josef would not give it because he genuinely did not feel it. The man who had caused so much suffering felt nothing about it. Rolf returned to Germany with his answer. His father was exactly what the survivors had described, a man without conscience, a man who could compartmentalize atrocity so completely that it simply ceased to exist in his own memory. But Rolf kept the secret. He did not reveal his father's location. The family's code of silence held. Death on a Brazilian beach. 2 years after Rolf's visit, on February 7, 1979, Josef Mengele went swimming at Bertioga Beach near Sao Paulo. He was 67 years old, in declining health, and the water was rougher than he expected. Somewhere in the waves, he suffered a stroke. He drowned before anyone could reach him. His body was recovered and buried in Embu das Artes under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. No announcement, no notification to authorities. The family that had protected him for 30 years simply absorbed the news and said nothing. And so the world kept hunting a dead man. For 6 more years, intelligence agencies followed leads, chased rumours and investigated sightings. Josef Mengele was reported in Paraguay, in Argentina, and in remote corners of South America where fugitives were known to hide. None of it was real. He had been in the ground since 1979. The family watched this manhunt continue and remained silent. They had protected Josef in life. Now they were protecting him in death, or perhaps protecting themselves from the questions that would follow if they admitted what they knew. The law that let them walk. In 1985, with international pressure mounting and a renewed manhunt making headlines, the Mengele family finally broke their silence. They admitted Josef had died 6 years earlier. They provided his diaries, his letters, his dental records. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains in that Brazilian grave belonged to the Angel of Death. The case was closed. But here is what viewers do not expect. The family faced 0 legal consequences. West German law included a provision called Angehörigen privilege, a legal protection for close relatives who help a fugitive family member evade capture. The law recognized that asking people to turn in their own blood was too much to demand. It carved out an exception to obstruction of justice when family was involved. Because of this provision, despite funding a war criminal for 34 years, despite routing money through couriers, despite elaborate deceptions designed to throw investigators off the trail, the Mengeles walked free. Not a single family member faced prosecution. In the 1980s, the state of Bavaria provided a multi-million-mark bailout to Mengele Agrartechnik. The company was struggling, and the government stepped in to save jobs. German taxpayers had effectively subsidized the family network that shielded the Angel of Death. When this connection became public, outrage followed, but it changed nothing. The money was already spent. The family remained untouched. The company that bore the Mengele name eventually went bankrupt in the late 1990s. It was acquired, stripped for parts, and sold off piece by piece and eventually absorbed by Lely in 2010, and then AGCO in 2017. The farm equipment that once carried the Mengele logo now carries different branding entirely. The name has vanished from tractors and balers across Europe. Rolf Mengele lived out his remaining years under his wife's surname, his own children shielded as much as possible from the weight of their grandfather's crimes. He gave one interview in 1985 where he described meeting his father in Brazil. He spoke carefully, measured, clearly still processing what he had learned decades earlier. Then he retreated from public life and never spoke about it again. Josef Mengele never faced trial. He never sat before judges while survivors testified about what he had done. He never heard a verdict read aloud in a courtroom. He died free, on a beach, aged 67, surrounded by the anonymity his family had purchased for him. The Mengele name did not disappear through justice. It faded through time. The family that protected a monster paid no legal price. The survivors who might have confronted him in court were denied that closure. And the machinery of family loyalty, money, silence, legal loopholes proved stronger than any manhunt. Some Nazi families rejected their war criminal relatives. Some faced consequences for the protection they provided. The Mengeles did neither. They funded Josef for 3 decades, orchestrated elaborate deceptions, and quietly waited for history to forget. In the end, they essentially won. Justice was denied, not by escape, but by family. Thanks for watching History Hangover. If you found this video insightful, check out our other deep dives into the families and figures who shaped World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you do not miss our next upload.